in the sense that it is there for you and you have the right to copy, modify, redistribute, recompile, and reinstall the software from its very start and existence. But I think a lot of people don't think about how that happens. Like, what were the mechanisms and policies and legal details of how that happened? Now, I should mention, I'm going to be mentioning some legalistic things in this talk. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I do expect to see this talk again in front of me at the Vizio trial when I'm on the stand. So, hello, Judge. Yes, I figured that that Vizio might want to interrogate me about this talk, but I'm happy to answer questions on it because I think it will explain a lot of things about why we care about the rights that you get with FOSS. Now, the way you get your rights with FOSS is because of licensing. Licensing, for most people, is an annoying thing to talk about. It's a thing that lawyers do, and it sounds really boring, and a lot of details and legalese and those sorts of things. But I got into licensing heavily for FOSS in 1996, 1997, and the reason I found it so compelling was because policy matters. What rights you have matters. What laws you live under matter. And it is very important to understand it, and you don't need to be a lawyer to understand it. Lawyers like to tell you, you can't understand any of this stuff, you need to call a lawyer, and you should call a lawyer if you need legal advice. However, it is possible to understand, and it should be possible to understand what your rights are under an agreement, because you need to be able to exercise those rights, and if you don't understand what they are, it's pretty hard to exercise them. So this is a very brief tutorial. I know a lot of people who come to Scale don't do open source like policy stuff every day. Scale may be the only time of year you sit down and think about policy stuff. But I want to give this really brief tutorial for those in the room who might be new to it. This is very simple overview that is incredibly simplified, and so there's a lot of nuance that I'm ignoring by presenting it this way. But basically, FOSS licenses have two flavors. One is the non-copyleft flavor, and that's things like 3-calls BSD, the Apache license, MIT license. And there's copyleft licenses, like the GPL, the LGPL, the AGPL, and Copyleft Next. And that's enough to get by if you want to understand FOSS licensing. There's a lot of nuance there, and if you're interested, we can take Q&A about all the nuance about it, but generally speaking, you do that. I just want to mention that I'm using the name Apache because that's the name they've chosen to use for their organization, their project, and their license. I have long felt that that is not an appropriate name to use since the Apache tribe of Native Americans are not involved with the project in any way. I know that there are people in the Apache Software Foundation working to change the name, and I hope they will do it very quickly. So I want to make the case that copyleft is fundamentally a better way to do FOSS licensing. BSD folks who are around the conference, they're not big fans of Linux, and they're not big fans of the GPL, and they'll probably talk your ear off if you'd like to hear about why copyleft is bad, but I want to argue why copyleft is actually better. And it's better because it's a real policy that embodies your rights into a document that you can rely on. You have a recourse if your software is under copyleft when you get it, if you have trouble finding the source code, modifying the source code, sharing the source code with your friends, rebuilding the source code, modifying the software, rebuilding it, and reinstalling it into the device that you have, whatever the Linux device is, be it a wireless router, a television, a laptop. And if the software is not copyleft, that means that the distributor in between you and the upstream, right? So an upstream project releases the software. They give you all those permissions. If you go to their main website of where the project is developed, you'll get all those rights. However, the entity in between, which is often a for-profit company, is within their rights to take away your rights. So they can do that with non-copylefted software, and by the time you get it, it will look nothing like FOSS anymore. In fact, if you have an iPhone, you have this, because many components in iOS, or if you have a Mac, in Mac OS, are in fact from the BSD project. And Steve Jobs and now Tim Cook decided you shouldn't have any rights. They said, oh, we don't want our users to have rights. We control everything. We'll protect their privacy by controlling all that they do. And so while that was FOSS once upon a time, it doesn't bear any resemblance to FOSS by the time you get it. If it were copylefted, well, first of all, Steve Jobs hated copyleft his whole life and wouldn't use it. But if it had been, you would have those rights. So copyleft has to initiate somewhere. I talked about the idea that the software is born free. Well, how is it born free? Well, what happens is when somebody starts writing the software, which is the copyright holder, which is usually the original developer, although there's some complexities there that I can take Q&A on if you're in the audience saying, well, that's not exactly right. Yes, that's true, but let's talk about during Q&A. But that copyright holder, who's the original developer, chooses to license their work a certain way. Now, they have the right to do that because they're the copyright holder, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how they have exclusive powers under copyright to choose how their license is. And what a copyleft software author says is, I believe in the world's right to copy, share, modify, redistribute, reinstall this software, and so I'm going to choose affirmatively this agreement for my software, and the only way that people can get my software is under this license that gives people those rights, and I can be assured as it spreads around the world as a copyright holder that they will have those rights. Now, in theory, that's how it's all supposed to work. In practice, the license is often violated. So what happens is in the distribution chain, somebody fails to do what that agreement required, and then everybody downstream from that piece of the distribution chain doesn't get the rights because the violator failed to arrange what they were supposed to arrange, that they would get all those rights when they received the software. So I've been doing GPL enforcement for a long time. I worked my first GPL enforcement matter in 1999. That was against a company called Veritas. I feel like it's been so many years I can say now who it was. And I continued to work on GPL enforcement basically for all of my career. Somehow I fell into being the GPL enforcement guy for my whole career because, as I said, I was very interested in the policy aspects of it. And a big thing that happened, and this relates a great deal to the talk you just heard for Denver, is this wireless router came out. And this was the first really versatile wireless router, and it was the first one, to our knowledge, that ran a Linux-based system. So when it came out in 2003, people quickly discovered that it had a Linux-based firmware. And I put together a coalition of copyright holders who wanted to do the enforcement to get the source code for this wireless router. And we used to have a weekly meeting from that period, from April to November in 2003. Every week we had a phone call with everybody involved. I was involved from the NetFilter project was involved. Eric Anderson for the BusyBox project was involved, a few others. And Harold, it was so, he was very young then. I didn't realize how young he was at the time. And I think he was like 22 at the time or something like that. And he would sit on the call, say nothing. At the very end, and his accent, his German accent was much heavier then, and he would say, "Why have we not sued them yet?" That's all he would say. And the thing is, Harold was right. We should have sued because what ultimately happened is Linksys did come into compliance, but their upstream Broadcom did not. So we got the software released mostly, but Broadcom withheld the driver for the wireless card. And their argument, and if you saw Denver's talk, you'll be hearing it again. Their argument was, well, the FCC, the FCC will never let us do that, and we'll be in violation of the regulations if we release the driver, and so we can't release the driver. And they flew 9 Broadcom executives to meet me with our attorneys at the time and deliver this message that they just couldn't release the driver. And we made a mistake. We should have said, well, we're going to sue you for that, and the courts will figure it out. Because as it turns out, the FCC didn't mind at all, as we found out when Denver built the OpenWRT1 with the OpenWRT project. So, and there was other policy details in there. The FCC published a ruling in 2008 that basically said they were not worried about this issue of open source drivers for wireless cards and so forth. So it's a huge mistake. I mean, I consider this one of the biggest mistakes of my career. I think things would have played out a lot better if I had just held steadfast and said, we're suing no matter what, and I'll find a way. And because it took us, what are we now, 22 years hence, it took that long to definitively prove they were wrong in that meeting in 2003. So I wish we'd done it a lot faster. But the good news is that everything except the wireless driver was released, and that actually became, this page is not live. I took a screenshot of this years ago, and the OpenWRT developers actually don't know where that copy of the website is. So I have the screenshot from years ago, and they also don't know where the original SVN tree is, which if anybody has, I would love to get, if you have an SVN checkout from OpenWRT circa the 2009 timeframe, because I can show in that, because I remember seeing it on the screen. I remember checking it out right after the OpenWRT project side. I was so excited when I did SVN log in those days, that's what you did. And I saw R1 as dumped by Linksys. And that was how they got started. They took that source code release and then started a project, which they then ported to hundreds and hundreds of different wireless router, and now today producing their own hardware with the OpenWRT ones that we see all over the conference here that Denver talked about earlier. So it's a huge success of the GPL and Copyleft. OpenWRT would not exist if Linux had not been under the GPL and we had not done enforcement. And that's really important to think about when you hear people saying, well, copyleft is a problem and so forth. Well, there are lots of companies that will not release their source code unless there's a policy agreement that requires them to do so contractually. And that's what the GPL and other copyleft licenses are. So after the Linksys case, I moved on to continue to do GPL investigations over the years in the mid to late 2000s. And basically, I began to realize that almost the entire industry was violating the GPL, as it turned out. I had a giant database at the time. Many of the companies are defunct, so the database isn't that useful. Of all, I used TRAC, it's TRAC, the Python-based bug tracking system. That's what I used for tracking GPL violations in those days. And I still have the SQLite database. It's this giant database of all these companies, most of them now out of business, that were violating the GPL. And so we picked 14 of them and decided to file a lawsuit. At that time, the Software Freedom Conservancy had started. We started in 2006. So we worked with, we were the home of the BusyBox projects. BusyBox had become part of the SFC. Eric Anderson, who wrote most of the BusyBox code, it's mostly been rewritten these 20 years later, but back then, almost all of the code was copyrighted by Eric. So Eric and SFC sued together. And I just want to make a note here. I'm going to embarrass Denver, so live with it. Denver walked up to me at a conference in early 2009 and said, I just bought a DVD player, and I think it runs Linux, and it doesn't have any source code. And so I took all the details down, and in fact, it ended up being that the lead defendant was Best Buy, which has a house brand called Insignia, that was Denver's DVD player. And that's how Denver got involved in GPL enforcement, by courting me in a conference and saying, give me my source code. Aren't you supposed to do that? And eventually I told him, like, you're going to have to do it yourself. Come work for us, and you got to fix this. I've been trying for years. I need some help. So we eventually got compliance from either the company stopped selling the product in question that was violating, or they came into compliance and released the source code for BusyBox, right? But one of the things we realized was there's this legal concept, again, I'm not a lawyer, but there's a legal concept called standing. And what standing is who has the right to adjudicate an issue, who has standing to file a lawsuit. And the way the standing question works with regard to copyright is the copyright holder has standing if you infringe their copyright to sue. And of course, Eric Anderson and SFC were suing over copyrights in BusyBox. Now, none of these products had just BusyBox. They were all Linux-based devices. They had BusyBox, they had glibc, they had tons of different LGPL and GPL stuff in them. But our leverage was through BusyBox. So in some cases, we ended up getting compliance only for BusyBox. So they gave us the source code of the BusyBox, the ability to reinstall it, but not for Linux and for everything else. And I got really frustrated during the case because I was like, well, but we need everything. Like we can't actually exercise our freedom if they don't comply with the GPL for all works. And so we really started to think at that point. So the lawsuit settled, the last defendant settled out around the 2012, 2013 timeframe. And we started really looking, and at that point Denver had come to work at least part-time for SFC. So Denver and I spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about how to do GPL enforcement. And what we realized was the most important people are not really the developers. I think FOSS in general glorifies and almost deifies the original developers a little bit too much. Developers are important. I used to be a developer. I like developers, like spending time with developers. I'm so thankful that they released their software under Copyleft licenses, but it's the people that matter. And so the people who use it, the people who get it and want to do something cool with it, and then they can later become upstream developers. When they get the source code and start hacking on it, that's how all of us in the early days became upstream developers. We got Linux, we made a patch, we made an improvement, we gave it back upstream, and that's how Linux and all the other GPL software we rely on today got built, or Copyleft generally, including LGPL. So we really spent the decade of 2013 to the 2017, 2018 timeframe just constantly thinking about what our strategy was to get the rights. And again, this is really the piece that they're going to show me at trial in the Vizio trial. It is true, if you look at my old talks, even from scale, I'm talking about copyright enforcement, copyright this, get the copyright holders together, have the copyright holders do enforcement. But do not take my lack of creativity for a belief that there wasn't other methods available to enforce. And in fact, once we started doing research and talking to legal counsel about it, it was obvious that we should be bringing contract claims, not necessarily, I mean, we still want to bring copyright claims sometimes, but the contract claim is much stronger because it is focused on the rights of the people that matter most, the consumer. And I remembered at the time when we finally came around this, I guess it was like circa 2019-ish, 2018-ish timeframe, we really started to focus on this. And I remember this quote that I actually, I quoted part of this in my high school yearbook. So it was a quote I knew well, and I said, yeah, this is what I was doing. I was engaged in a foolish consistency, and it was the hobgoblin of my little mind that I was like, oh, copyright, copyright, copyright. But there were plenty of other options available, and contract claims were obviously the better option in a lot of cases. So the question is, how does that work? Okay, so it's a copyright license, but it's also a contract at the same time. And again, this is legal details, but it's worth it's kind of diving in here. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but it's important that non-lawyers understand what their rights are and how their system works that they rely on. So copyright is what's called a statutory thing, right? So literally the laws in the United States and other countries as well have this law that says if you generate a creative work and affix it in a tangible medium, as it says, you get certain rights that are defined by law directly. You have the right to decide how people can copy, prepare derivative works, modify the work, redistribute the work, and so forth, and you get to do whatever you want with that. By default, no one else is allowed to do any of those things. Once the work is put into the tangible medium, no one else can copy it, modify it, redistribute it, even necessarily, well, they can read it, but they can't like go on your computer and take it away from you. It's yours until you choose how you're going to license it, right? So then under that exclusive power you have in copyright, you get to choose your license. And what Copyleft licensors have done is they've chosen a license that says, we have this agreement that we want everybody to agree to before they can engage in those activities that we have exclusive rights over. So when you look at the GPL, and again, I want to point out the date on this. In 1991, the GPL was a contract because what it said was, well, copyright controls this work. And it doesn't require you accept my license. You don't have to form a contract, form an agreement with me. But what I'm going to say is, if you make the decision upon seeing my GPL'd or LGPL'd work that you would like to engage in activities governed by copyright, which are my exclusive control as the copyright holder, copying, modifying, redistributing, all those preparing derivative works, then your only permission is this license. That's the only thing that can give you that permission. So you have to accept this license as a contractual agreement when you begin engaging in those activities. And your action of engaging in those activities indicates your consent to this agreement. So that was the epiphany for us to realize this is the strategy, this is the way to approach this. Because in the end, the primary beneficiary that mattered the most under this agreement was not the copyright holder, right? The copyright holder's doing an altruistic thing of sharing their software because they believe in this. And it's not even really the OEM. Now, of course, the OEM of a product receives a license from the copyright holder. They have the permission to copy, modify, and reinstall, but they're just one entity. And the real issue in this policy document is when large groups of people then get distributed the work. And so that OEM is one entity. It has the rights because it got them under the contract from the copyright holder, and then they give it out to the world. And those are the people that matter the most. And as it turns out, the OEM quite oftenly, sneakily often, takes away those rights, gives you a binary-only copy, doesn't give you the source code like the GPL says, doesn't give you the right to recompile it, doesn't give you the right to reinstall it. So what we'll see, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Vizio case in a minute, is that what's happening is that large group of people who can buy the device on some retailer and bring it into their home, they're what's called a third-party beneficiary of the Copyleft agreement. I want to dig a little bit into what that means because it's a legalistic concept, and I'll give you an example. So imagine, I'm trying my best to save for retirement, so I have a little bit of money put away, but one of the things I want to have happen with that money is if something happens to me and my spouse doesn't need the money, I like to go to SFC because I care deeply about the organization where I work, and I won't need the money anymore because I'll be dead. So I'm going to make an agreement with Denver. Denver, would you agree as a contract that I'm going to put some money aside, and would you agree to make sure that that money goes to the SFC? Okay, great. He's agreed. So we have a contract now that I haven't told him the amount yet, but we'll start with $1,000. Definitely, there's $1,000 that's going to be in my estate. You have a right. Yeah, I want you to make sure to get FC. So suppose I walk out of here and get hit by one of these. You drive so fast in the greater LA area. It's terrifying. So suppose I get hit by one of those cars, right? So I made this agreement with Denver about this $1,000 from my estate that's supposed to go, and Denver's supposed to do it. But a really scary thing's happen. As Denver walks out, the ghost of Steve Jobs takes over his brain. And now he hates Copyleft all of a sudden, and he says, you know what, I don't want that $1,000 to go to SFC. I wanted to go to buying a couple of iPhones and I guess you can only buy one iPhone for that, but you can buy half an iPhone. I want to buy half an iPhone and give it to somebody so they use more iPhones because I want them to use more proprietary software. Well, what do we do? Because I made the agreement with Denver. I put let's assume I put the money in some sort of escrow account where he can get it. And he goes off and does this. Well, the thing is, this agreement you just saw me and Denver make, SFC, our employer and separate entity, is a third-party beneficiary of that agreement. So SFC would have the right to sue the now possessed body of Denver, of Steve Jobs' ghost, and say, no, we don't care that you were possessed by Steve Jobs. Denver made an agreement, and you're in his body, so you have to. I don't know if there's much case law about ghost possession, so there's a little bit of like a hypothetical here. But they're saying, well, no, Denver, as a legal person, you are required to give that money to SFC, even though we didn't even know about the agreement. Like I didn't tell our board or Karen, our executive director, about this agreement. We just made this up now. But because they are a third-party beneficiary, once they're aware of that agreement, they have the right to, and standing, as I mentioned, to file a lawsuit against Denver to demand that $1,000 back for SFC. Even though they were not even the SFC is an entity, the board, Karen as the executive director, weren't even here, didn't even know we made the agreement. So we've begun doing work in this direction. Denver talked in his keynote about this AVM lawsuit. That's focused on the LGPL, which is a very important license as well, and has some interesting aspects to it that we're really excited about, and we're doing more looking at LGPL enforcement as well. And Sebastian went in as a consumer who had bought the AVM device. And we've basically adjudicated this issue in Germany. Now, it's not as exciting as it sounds because Germany is not a precedent-based system. They're not a common law system like the US, the UK, and Australia. They're a civil law system, so civil lawsuits do not actually set precedents. So it's a little bit harder in Germany because you can't set a precedent. It's like each case is sort of its own contained thing. But in this contained case, AVM gave up fighting with Sebastian. They allowed him and us to publish how to recompile, reinstall the LGPL on the device in question, and they even paid his legal fees and agreed with the court to pay his legal fees, basically admitting their guilt. They will tell you they didn't admit their guilt, but they admitted their guilt. And ultimately did the right thing, which is important to mention, that they did share the software they were supposed to share, although they should have done it from the start and they shouldn't have fought Sebastian for so long. Now, you've heard all day now at this point about the Vizio lawsuit. And what we did is we were looking for devices we could use at the SFC to do things. And I was very interested in the fact that all these TVs had Linux-based firmwares, but they're mainly to run like proprietary streaming services. And I'm like, what I want to do, like I had this vision of TVs mounted around my house, and so people want to do video chat all the time. I don't like video chat. I mean, we use Big Blue Button, there's also Jitsi, is open source and free software. So, but even when it's open source, I design my life around the idea of working from home so I could clean the kitchen while on conference calls. And this video chat thing, I have to sit there and my kitchen's no longer clean ever since video chat became a big thing. So a lot of times I just dial in and then I'm not on video and I'm like, oh, Bradley, you're not on video, and all that stuff. So what I'd like to do is mount TVs running Linux around my house and then be able to just put the BBB window up on all these different machines. So if I'm standing in the kitchen cleaning, I can be like, hi, I'm on the kitchen cleaning, but I'm here listening, So that was what I was thinking would be cool to do. So we bought these Vizio TVs, but they were all violating the GPL. And it was really annoying too because Denver had already done a bunch of work years before to enforce the license against them. We really flagged for them that they were violating the license. And in the next generation, the license violations were even worse. They had redone their firmware, but it was completely violating the GPL and LGPL on dozens of products, dozens of upstream projects. If you look at our complaint, there's a whole laundry list that we told the court about of GPL and LGPL programs that appeared. And we told the court in Vizio, while technically we are a copyright holder in many of these works, not all of them, but many of the works we have some copyrights in that are mentioned, but we didn't seek our standing through being a copyright holder. We sought our standing as we bought a bunch of TVs to do an interesting project. They were violating the GPL. We couldn't do our interesting project, so we would like our third-party beneficiary right under the license from all the works that are in there under the GPL and LGPL to get the complete corresponding source code and the right to copy, modify, recompile, and reinstall that software. Vizio has basically no interest in giving us that, so the lawsuit continues. How many people are local to California? Most people in the room. I want to ask you a favor. Denver already asked. I'm going to ask again. If you can schedule your vacation or time off from work, I know it's a lot to ask to give up a week of vacation to do this, but think about it. You got time to think about it. It starts Monday, September 15th. It's Orange County. It's not that far. I mean, it probably takes 3 hours to drive there because of traffic around here, but you can get there a reasonable amount of time. And please come. The courtroom that we're in, I assume it's going to be in Judge Statton's court that we've been in for some of the hearings. There's only about 30 seats. I think it would be amazing if we got 50 people to show up so it's standing room only, because one of the things we've found in the case is that Vizio's argument is there's nobody who cares about this. You all are just irritants that are just trying to make trouble. And we would really like to show the whole court that there are people that care about their right to modify and reinstall Linux on Linux-based devices. And having people in the court, you don't have to, like Denver said, be silent in your support. Just sitting there, watching, listening, being present those kind of things make a difference. They show, and if nothing else, it will make Vizio nervous because they'll say, wow, we were wrong. People really do care about this issue. So help us show them that they're wrong because we know they are. and come to the case if you can. I know it's a lot to ask. I mean, I know some people only get 2 weeks vacation from the job, but we'd love to have you there. And I will make the case that, I mean, there are a lot of court TV shows in the world for a reason, right? Courtroom is a drama environment, and it's fun to watch drama, right? People watch it all the time. Like how many TV shows have fake lawsuits on them every day? So come and watch it. It'll be about things you care about. It'll be interesting. There'll be lots of technical detail in some of the testimony. I think it will be an enjoyable week. So I ask you to come and ask all your friends to come and watch our website. We think the trial date is set now permanently. It's got delayed a few times, but watch our website for changes and so forth. But please think about coming. So we've got some time left. I never started my timer, so I don't know how. I told the organizer here that I had a timer, which I just realized I never started. So I now have to ask for time to be tracked retroactively, and I apologize for that. But I think there should be a lot of time left, right?
We've got 25 minutes.
25 minutes, great, for Q&A. So I will reset this timer for 25 minutes. So then now it'll actually work. Apologize for that. Oops, that's the wrong button. And Denver's here as well, and so we're both. I know that probably people had more questions they wanted to ask during the keynote. So you can ask me or Denver questions about either of our talks, and we're just glad to take any question or issue about SFC, our work, GPL enforcement, Copyleft, anything you want to ask. We're welcome to just open it up to discussion now.
So I'm going to actually be walking around because we have this mic for others as well. So I'll be answering questions if you ask them while I'm standing beside you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bradley, for your work with your historical work with the Free Software Foundation and the SFC and all of your free software contributions. I really appreciate it. In the successes that you've had, getting manufacturers to release source code for their devices under the GPL, what have you seen as the long-term effects of that? Like, the ideal state is that manufacturers continue to release source code for their products with new versions and new products that they release. But a potential alternative is they might seek other software where they're not obligated to release source code. What have you seen as the long-term effect for manufacturers?
I have a really fun anecdote to answer that question with, which is so that 2003 enforcement against Linksys. We felt it was very successful. We had a very complex and tense negotiation with Linksys, but really Broadcom was the aggressor and the problem, and Linksys really wanted to release the source code. And as soon as they got the source code from Broadcom, or at least I thought, as soon as they got the source code from Broadcom, sans the wireless driver, they released it. There was a big Slashdot story, which was the big news site in those days, less popular now, and people were downloading and OpenWRT started. And so about a week after that finished, I called Sherman Chu, who later moved, because Cisco had just bought Linksys about 6 months before the violation started. So the product had been developed by Linksys as an independent entity, and then they were bought by Cisco, and the thing was already in production. And so I called Sherman Chu, who at the time was like in the general counsel's office. I think he was associate general counsel or something of Cisco, and really to take a victory lap with him. Like I said, hey Sherman, just giving you a call. Like I know this was contentious, painful, but we got the right result. I think it's going to be great for Linksys long term, for the brand. I was right, by the way, because that thing is still for sale, the WRT54G, because so many people, well, before the OpenWRT1, now the OpenWRT1 should be the one as it is named, but until the OpenWRT1, WRT54G was the one people knew, I can run OpenWRT on that, it will work. And so they still produce that under the Linksys brand. So I was totally right when I said that to Sherman. And Sherman said to me, this has been a horrible process. You and all you open source people are horrible. I've made a rule inside Cisco and Linksys that we will never, ever use GPL software again. And if you do some research, you'll find that from around like the 2004, mid-2004 to the 2006 timeframe, every Linksys router that was produced used VxWorks, which is a proprietary alternative for embedded operating systems. And then when you start to look at the 2008, 2009 timeframe, all of a sudden Linux starts showing up again, violating the GPL again. And I know I have many sources inside companies. I appreciate those of you who work inside companies and are sleeper agents is going a bit far, but secretly really support free software, but you're working for some proprietary company. I know a lot of you, and if you, I keep sources confidential, but I had plenty of sources inside Linksys and Cisco, and what was happening was the engineers were like, VxWorks doesn't work. Like, we can't build wireless routers on this, so they started sneaking Linux back in, and because Sherman had made this foolish edict, they were violating the GPL again, because instead of creating a system whereby, okay, we're going to make sure when we use Linux, we do the right thing, and we make sure the source code's available and so forth, doesn't hurt our business, as proved by the WRT-54G, instead they made this silly rule that no Linux allowed, and they got themselves in trouble again, and got sued by the FSF over it, because they just didn't do the right thing. That they should have. So in my opinion, that's the only time I've really seen on a massive scale a company say, nope, we're not going to do GPL anymore because we don't like, we're not going to give this source code and stuff. And it completely backfired for them. And to this day, Linksys has been sold and resold. It's not owned by Cisco anymore. But there are Cisco products that include GPL stuff. There are Linksys products that include GPL stuff. Many of them still do violate. From time to time. I can't give you a litany of which ones don't do and which ones don't violate. But it's not like they stopped using Linux. What they did instead is they decided, you know what? There's like only a few people, like Bradley, Denver, Karen Sandler, out there enforcing the GPL in this little tiny org called the SFC. Let's just crush them, and then we can get away with violating GPL forever. And we faced lots of efforts by the industry to put us out of business so that they could just willy-nilly violate the GPL. So I think that's really was the strategy. It was not switch to other stuff. It was, how do we crush these people who want their rights? Like, let's just make sure consumers don't have rights. That's the answer. Denver, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent example there of why it's just not possible. I mean, developers have made all of this excellent software exactly because of the license, because they can share and contribute and collaborate, and that a company can't shut it down later because they can't proprietarize it. And so I think that's why they're scared, because people have rights. Developers are making great software, and they know that all the great software, like Linux and stuff, is under copyleft licenses.
Hey, so I just wanted to add that they did the change, but they also released the 54GL, because the original version had 4 megabytes of RAM. When they went to VNext, they had 2 megabytes of RAM, and then they released the GL, which was the one that had the L basically, but meant for Linux, came back to 4 again. I only know that because I was on the receiving end and like, oh, why they change it? So I had to look for the GL specifically.
Yeah. Well, and I remember that. I remember that change, and that was after my conversation with Sherman Chu and so forth. And it was like, well, and I agree with you. They put the L in there to like signal that it ran Linux and that it worked. And it was all because of what happened in the enforcement that it did and it worked. And so it's just so funny to me that, I mean, there must, and I've talked to my sources. I have a really good source who used to work for Linksys, doesn't anymore, but did during much of that era, and said like it was their bestseller. It was always their bestseller. For years and years after the enforcement. I mean, we turned it by doing enforcement into their bestseller, and I'm sure they made millions on that darn thing. And it's sort of like, well, you made millions on a device that was in compliance. Like, why are you still violating GPL on other products? It doesn't make any sense other than a desire to control consumers and to have power, as Denver talked about, over consumers, which the consumer should be in the power, not the manufacturers.
I see some companies moving, like switching from a copyleft to a copyright, like say, I think, I may be mistaking this, but like say HashiCorp with like Terraform. I don't know where I'm actually going with this question, but one of the things is like I assume that move means that they don't use anything upstream, or
Well, what's tended to happen in open source, I gave a talk about this, I'm trying to remember what year it was at Scale. I gave a talk about that issue of sort of the, what I've sometimes called the uncoordinated conspiracy to discredit copyleft that the for-profit industry did, which includes like a big keynote by the GitHub founder at OSCON in like 2007 or so, to basically say that copyleft's bad license, it's bad for business, don't use copyleft, only use non-copyleft licenses. So that is a zeitgeist that the employers have been able to generate. And around that time frame, late 2000s, early 2010s, I started to have developers come up to me to say, I'd like to use copyleft, but my employer just won't touch anything copyleft. Yet they still use Linux, right? I mean, that's sort of funny because it's like what operating system is all this stuff running on? It's almost surely a Linux-based system. But as far as like, and that's one of the reasons why I feel, and I talked about this in that talk years ago, why we kind of lost the user space, right? Because I kind of look as we played to stalemate on the operating system because like the Linux is the most popular operating system kernel, and it's widely used, and it's GPL'd, and a lot of the mid-level software, systemd, glibc, GCC, and all that stuff are under GPL as well, but when you go up another level in the stack, you see mostly either non-copyleft software or proprietary. And I think that's from industry pressure, right? I mean, people saw that copyleft was something that might cause them to have to work harder to make money. Like, and that's the funny thing is, right, it's just easier to make money with proprietarized software, and it's easier to deal with a license that doesn't put any requirements on you as a business. But that doesn't mean it's the right policy. Right, it's for the world. It's just the right policy for those who want to maximize profits over user rights. And so our proposal is like, we have obvious examples like the WRT54G of projects that, sorry, Denver, I forgot. It's Denver's laptop, because I don't have HDMI on mine because I'm still VG only, because it's the last laptop model you can buy that, or get used that is 100% free software. So Denver's laptop with his blob, Denver's lent me his blobs, proprietary blobs to be able to present. But yeah, so I think that's really what I see happening there, is that was really a concerted effort by companies to convince people to license things under non-copyleft licenses so that they have more options, which is true, but those options are bad for user rights. So I don't support the idea of running away from copyleft, even though I understand why these companies want to do it. Denver, do you have anything you want to add to that? You don't have to. I'm just offering the opportunity.
No, I'm good. Yeah, looks like there's another question here. You said it very well, by the way.
Thank you.
To add on to what this person was asking, I think an important aspect of what we're seeing with the moves those companies are making is that these projects start out as open source projects, but they impose a CLA, a contributor license agreement, on everybody that contributes to the project. And that gives them the ability to then relicense all of those contributions at a later date. So I think what unfortunately we are starting to see a lot of, and we have seen in the last 5 or so years, is projects that have even fairly strict copyleft licenses like the AGPL, but they also enforce a CLA for all contributions. And it's really a mistreatment of copyleft licenses, because it takes away the rights from the people contributing software and centralizes all the rights in the company that is the primary developer.
Yeah, thank you for making that point, because it's a very good one. And if you search, I think if you search for the 2 words copyleft equality, you will find my main essay on this very issue, because you're exactly right in what you're describing. What happened? One of the collateral damage with regard to copyleft was the realization by some of these companies that what they could engage in is called proprietary relicensing. So what they're able to do, if they've used the CLA to gather up all the rights, because they have all the rights, like I was talking about the copyright holder, and I said original developer was an estimation, that like you're sort of asking about that. When a single entity collects up all those copyrights and that entity is a bad actor, or just a avarice-motivated for-profit actor, they say, well, you know what we can do is we can sell separate proprietary licenses. And then they took it another step. And that in itself is like seedy, but not disaster. The disaster step that all of these companies always engage in, MySQL being the first one to do it, which is now the Oracle is doing this process for the MySQL code base, is they said, well, you know what? If we overread the GPL and tell people they're violating when they aren't, like MySQL literally would go to customers, which are really just shakedowns, and say, oh, if you write an SQL statement and you happen to run on a MySQL server, that's a derivative work under copyright of the MySQL server. I mean, completely asinine argument. And therefore, you have to buy a proprietary license to MySQL. You can't use the GPL version. And that became a business model that a lot of these companies used. And so some companies have doubled down on this. MongoDB is a great example where the AGPL was not even strict enough for them to do the business model they want. So they wrote a different license called the SS GPL. And what it does is it has a clause that no one but MongoDB couldn't even comply with. If they didn't have the CLA, they would not be able to comply because it says everything in the entire stack, all the way down to the operating system, has to be under SSPL. And I don't know about you, but I haven't seen any operating systems released under SSPL lately. So you can't actually run it on Linux legally. You have to buy the proprietary license from MongoDB. So these kinds of behaviors are just abhorrent. And I've talked about this for like 15 years, and it's really hard to educate people because it's a complex question. Because the license on the surface, I mean, SSPL aside, it's AGPL or GPL, but you kind of have to look at the governance model. My colleague Richard Fontana at Red Hat coined this term called inbound equals outbound as a method for governance of an open source project. And what that means is everybody who is inbound to the project gets the same license as everybody outbound. So what that means is if you get a GPL'd work, you keep your own copyrights when you write, and you have to license everybody else's copyrights under GPL and then contribute your under GPL even though you keep the copyright. And that creates an equality-based system where every contributor has equal rights and every contributor is bound to every other contributor by the GPL contractual agreement. What the CLAs are doing that you're talking about is they're saying, well, no, we want to use this as our outbound license, the AGPL or GPL, but our inbound is a different agreement entirely that gives us all the power. And that's really the problem. But explaining that nuance, which you clearly understand because you're pointing right to the issue, but it's really hard to explain that nuance to folks. So, and afterwards, if anybody has ideas of like other advocacy ways to explain that nuance, I'm open to them because I've tried lots of them, and still, it's just one of these things where people's eyes start to glaze over, like, but it's still GPL'd, right? But, and it's like, it's too much level of detail. And that's in fact what these companies are relying on. Because they go out and say, oh, we have a GPL project. And it's like, no, you don't, not really. And they're like, oh, it's GPL. Look at the license of the repository. It's like, well, yeah, but look at the contributing.md file. That is important too. Anything you want to add to that, Denver?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know about. I would say that we do, you should look at that when you're contributing to a project, see if it has that property. I don't know if there's an easy way of categorizing these or otherwise, but yeah, if you're thinking of using something or like hitching your business to something, like check that out to see if that's an issue, because this has happened before with distributions that are trying to distribute this software. It's like, oh, well, we have this thing in our repository of software because it's licensed this way, and then like next release, it's not there because they changed the license and they can't include it anymore. And so, but if you have something that's multi-copyright holder held with no CLA, then that's not going to happen, and you will be able to use it for a long time. So I think getting people to understand what makes true resilience in software freedom happen is really important, and I look forward to finding new ways of doing that, but for now you need to look carefully at projects you are planning to use.
We have about 5 minutes left, so we have some more time for more questions.
The previous question mentioned the GPL, and it seems there are some licenses that have the reputation as being a strict license. So I wanted to ask if you could clarify, among these quote-unquote strict licenses, what are the differences among them?
Very good question. So the GPL was designed, as we put up, and actually the first version of GPL was 1989, the GPL v2 was 1991, long before we understood what the internet was going to look like in 2025 or even 2010. And so it focused the copyleft trigger on distribution. So under GPL, if you have a copy of a GPL software on your own machine and you don't give anyone a copy of either a binary or the source code of that software, you have relatively few obligations under the GPL. So just because somebody knows you have GPL software inside your business, as an example, they can't come knock on your door and say, give me the source code. You'll say, well, I never distributed that to anybody, so I don't have to give it to you. Even if I made changes, like if you make private changes to Linux or GCC under GPL, you're allowed to keep those private. What's the Affero clause, which I'll take the credit that I invented the Affero clause. The Affero clause was designed to handle the problem that we were starting to see as what we used to call AJAX or the Web 2.0 era back in 2004, 2005 came about, where we saw, well, wait a second, if folks are running software on a server and there's a complex service being provided, because remember, in the 90s, a website was just HTML, mostly with a tiny bit of JavaScript, and JavaScript almost did nothing in those days. So suddenly we're saying, wow, there's these complex software applications. Some of it's done in JavaScript, which of course is distributed. So if you could GPL the JavaScript, and then when the JavaScript comes in your browser, you have a right to get source code. But the JavaScript's making callbacks to this stuff on the server, and even if that stuff on the server is GPL'd, it has not been distributed to you. So you can't demand the source code for the server-side stuff under GPL. What Affero GPL's added, and some people do call this stricter because it's an extra requirement that's not present in the GPL, is the copyleft requirements. Instead of triggering on distribution, they trigger on deployment. So if you give someone access to a website that is running Affero GPL code, the person with the access to the website also has a contractual right to ask for the source code and get it from you. As opposed to if it were GPL, they wouldn't have that right. So that's the difference. And some people will call the Affero GPL the strictest copyleft because it has this extra requirement. I mean, strict is an interesting word. Like, it's stricter in its defense of user rights, is what I would say. A lot of people who criticize it say as Tom Preston Warner of GitHub said in his famous keynote criticizing copyleft, he said, the GPL and AGPL are a license of restrictions. It's just more restrictions. Well, one person's restrictions are policy requirements to adhere to users' rights. I mean, I guess we could call it a restriction that we can't murder people. But I'm pretty glad we have a law that says we're not allowed to do that. Denver, you want anything to that?
No, I'm good.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I think we have 2 minutes left.
I work for a company where they blacklist, basically, GPL-style code bases.
So they don't use Linux at all?
They have a list. They say if you want to use this list, you have to go talk to the lawyers, and it's going to be a pain. So do you have any recommendations on like how to advocate for like liberalizing that policy, or like people I could talk to who've done that in their companies, like that kind of thing?
Did I turn it off? No. Battery might be dead. I don't think it's all. We're almost done. I'll use this one. I'll just take it out to make sure we don't get feedback. So So the question, to start over since I wasn't mic'd, I've arranged my life to work for nonprofit charities. I last worked for a for-profit company in 1996. I've worked for only nonprofit organizations since then. So I struggle to understand what it's like in for-profit companies and I mean, people tell me about it. I talk to lots of people who work for for-profits, but I'm not the best person to give that advice simply because I don't know what your life is like inside a for-profit. And I think it's probably pretty painful. My life's painful in different ways at nonprofits. The only good advice my dad ever gave me was when you switch jobs, you trade one set of problems for an entirely different set of problems. So I have the nonprofit problems, not the for-profit problems. I think the best thing to do in any negotiation, because it's just a negotiation, is to stay steadfast and think about your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and really push. And if you can find GPL code bases that are going to make the product so much better, that's always the best way to go and say, look, I'm going to spend 6 months re-implementing this because GPL or LGPL code base would solve it. That's why it's so important for people to volunteer to write LGPL and GPL code base, like Linux, which was primarily written by volunteers, at least its earliest versions, because the Copyleft works best when there's a code base that's so seductive. That's why I made that joke about, do they use Linux, right? Because Linux is so seductive because it's such a good operating system kernel that people just can't live without it. They're willing to put up with the fact that it's Copyleft just to get Linux. And if the code base isn't that good, in the end, they're going to use something else. But we need lots of good code bases. That's the front load to Copyleft of writing those kind of things. Anyway, I think we're out of time. I do want to ask you to please donate to SFC. We're a nonprofit charity. It's a tax-deductible donation in the U.S. Please become a sustainer. Thank you, everybody, for coming.